think the family in Europe is a family in Europe. It's basically a mixed bag when it comes to the family in Europe. We see comparatively high rates of fertility in Northern Europe, and that's a good thing. I mean, they're basically almost at replacement level, so they're having enough kids to sustain themselves. But many of these kids are being born outside of marriage, and we know from the literature that these kids are more likely to see their parents break up, and their societies are experiencing more family instability, more generally. So that's sort of the downside to the Northern European experience. In Southern Europe, there still is a comparatively higher level of marital fertility in terms of people are having their kids in marriage, but they're of course not having as many kids as they should be. Especially when it comes to the sort of sustaining the society, the population moving forward. And the other point of concern in Southern Europe is that we're seeing the erosion of marriage as the primary place where kids are being born. So there's increases in non-marital childbearing in Spain and Italy and elsewhere, and that's a cause for concern because kids are more likely to suffer when their parents are not married. So I think many families are struggling financially, and so one thing that the governments can do is to provide more resources for families. And one good idea is these home care allowances, which allow parents to decide for themselves how to best spend money on the care of their kids. So in some cases they'll choose a child care, but in many cases they'll choose to have one parent stay home or to juggle work and family to allow for the kids to be in the household when they're young. So and that's one good measure. I also think that the policies should prefer married couples. As I said before, married couples are more stable, and so that we should have both, tax policies, for instance, that prefer the married family, as well as divorce laws that make it harder for people who have no legitimate reason, where there's no abuse, there's no abandonment, there's no drug use, to get divorced, and to also take into account marital conduct when making decisions about divorce, custody, and property division. So those are some of the kinds of things that we could do to strengthen family life in the European continent. But it's also interesting to note that, just to give you one example, the sort of focus on marriage has really come back in England in the recent election cycle that's happening right now. So I think that's sort of one hopeful sign that marriage kind of disappeared from the policy scene in many European countries in the last 30 years, but it's come back in England as they've recognized that their increase in crime in the last 30 years is directly tied to the breakdown of marriage in England. So that's actually a sign of hope, I think. What's sobering about the American experience of the last 30 years is that we're seeing the emergence of a polarized society where college-educated Americans are doing pretty well when it comes to marriage. Divorce is down among this group. Non-marital childbearing is very small. Most Americans who are college educated have their kids in marriage, the vast majority. But Americans who aren't educated as much, who are working class, who are poor, marriage is basically disappearing in that community. High rates of divorce, high rates of non-marital childbearing. And I think what's happened here basically is that when the elites in America stopped supporting marriage, both politically and culturally, what happened is that the working class and the poor took this, in a sense, message to heart, and their marriages fell apart. So what I think one thing we can learn from the American experience is that the elites need to recover appreciation for marriage, in part to protect the most vulnerable members of their societies. And you see the same polarization happening not just in England, as we see now, but in other countries, for instance, like France. So my concern that I have moving forward in Europe is that you may see this polarization happening where poor and working class kids are more likely to be reared by a single parent, and well-educated upper middle class kids are more likely to be reared in a two-parent home. So and this is a consequence of kind of shifts in family norms in the West. So that's one thing. And the other thing that we've learned really in the American context is that some targeted marriage policies can be helpful in supporting these working class and poor couples. There are a number of programs in the U.S. that have been focusing on giving them skills like communication, conflict resolution, and an increased appreciation for commitment. And these couples are more likely to get and stay married. So we can, I think, we don't have to kind of wash our hands of it all. We can kind of recognize that these challenges are ones that we can face and confront if we have the will to do so.